My name is Gwen, 33 years old, and until last Sunday, I thought I was marrying a top-tier wealth manager who respected my independence. My future mother-in-law demanded my bank PIN. I said no. My perfect fiancé blocked the door, and raised his fist to strike me just to please his mommy. They expected a terrified victim. Instead, I looked him in the eye, raised my leg and delivered a blow that ended our relationship right then and there. If you have ever been pushed into a corner by toxic in-laws, hit the like and subscribe buttons because you will want to see exactly how I dismantled their entire fake empire. The air in Brenda's Seattle mansion always smelled like expensive regret and heavy floral perfume. We were seated around a massive mahogany dining table that cost more than my first car. Sunday dinners here were mandatory performative events. Brenda sat at the head of the table, swishing her Chardonnay, her diamond rings clinking against the crystal glass. Bradley, my fiancé of 6 months, sat beside me in his crisp designer suit, playing the role of the devoted son to perfection. The tension was thick enough to carve with a steak knife. Brenda had been making passive-aggressive comments about the wedding budget all evening. She believed a wedding was a theatrical production meant to impress her country club friends, while I preferred something elegant but financially sensible. I am a forensic accountant. I track missing millions and expose corporate fraud for a living. I deal in hard data, not emotional manipulation. So when Brenda abruptly set her wine glass down and reached into her designer handbag, I knew the evening was about to take a sharp turn. She pulled out a crisp white document and slid it across the polished wood directly in front of my plate. I glanced down. It was a joint account authorization form from my primary bank, my personal bank. Attached to it with a gold paperclip was a sticky note demanding my routing number, account number, and debit card PIN. I looked up at her, my expression completely neutral. Brenda offered a smile that did not reach her cold eyes. She steepled her fingers together and leaned forward. "Gwen, darling." Brenda began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Since the wedding is only 4 months away, the expenses are piling up. Caterers, florists, the country club deposit. It is simply too much for me to keep track of while juggling my own accounts. I need you to fill out this form and write down your PIN. It just makes sense for me to manage the wedding budget directly from your funds, so we do not have any awkward delays in vendor payments." I stared at the piece of paper, then shifted my gaze to Bradley. I expected him to laugh, to grab the paper, and tell his mother she was crossing a massive boundary. Instead, he reached over, tapped the paper with his index finger, and nodded solemnly. "Mom is right," Gwen Bradley said, using his smooth, persuasive wealth manager voice. "We are about to be a married couple. Family transparency is the foundation of a strong marriage. You have been so busy with your audits and corporate clients. Mom is doing us a huge favor by offering to handle the logistics. Just jot down the PIN. It is not a big deal." Not a big deal. I let those words hang in the air. A wealth manager was telling a forensic accountant to hand over direct access to her personal life savings to a third party. The sheer audacity of the request was staggering. Bradley placed his hand over mine, squeezing slightly, a gesture that felt more like a warning than a comfort. "We do not keep secrets in this family," Bradley added, his tone dropping an octave. "You are marrying into my family now, Gwen. We pool our resources. We trust each other. When you hold back your financial details, it makes Mom feel like you do not trust her. It makes me feel like you are not fully committed to us." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. They sat there, mother and son, watching me with identical expressions of entitled expectation. They genuinely believed I was going to reach for a pen and hand over the keys to my financial independence just to keep the peace at a Sunday dinner. They had mistaken my usual quiet observation for submission. I calmly slid my hand out from under Bradley's grip. I picked up the authorization form, folded it precisely in half, and pushed it back across the table toward Brenda. "No," I said, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. Brenda blinked, her false smile faltering. "Excuse me, my money stays in my account," I stated clearly, looking directly into her eyes. "I pay for my portions of the wedding directly to the vendors. I do not hand over my personal banking identification to anyone. You are my future mother-in-law, Brenda, not my CPA. The temperature in the dining room plummeted. Brenda's face flushed a deep, angry red. She gasped, pressing a hand to her pearl necklace as if I had just slapped her across the face. Bradley, she choked out, looking at her son with wide, victimized eyes. Are you going to let her speak to me this way in my own home? I am trying to help her. I am trying to welcome her into our lives, and she treats me like a criminal. Bradley's posture stiffened. The charming, polished fiancé vanished, replaced by a man I barely recognized. His jaw clenched and his eyes darkened with genuine fury. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. You are being completely unreasonable. Bradley snapped, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. Mom is trying to take the stress off your shoulders and you are acting like a paranoid lunatic. Give her the pin, Gwen. Now. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back in my chair, calculating the situation. I hunt financial predators for a living, and every alarm bell in my head was ringing. This was not about wedding flowers. This was a shakedown. Brenda pressed her expensive linen napkin to her eyes, emitting a high-pitched sob that echoed through the massive dining room. It was a masterful performance. She squeezed out crocodile tears, her shoulders shaking in a display of manufactured devastation. I have only ever tried to welcome you with open arms, Brenda wailed, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical timing. I treat you like my own flesh and blood, and you look at me like I am a thief. I am just a mother trying to help her son build a beautiful life. I watched the performance without blinking. My silence only fueled the fire. Bradley pushed his chair back so violently it tipped over and crashed against the hardwood floor. The polished, charismatic wealth manager I had fallen in love with completely vanished. The charming smile that had won over countless clients was replaced by a contorted, red-faced sneer. His breathing grew heavy and erratic. He looked at his mother playing the wounded martyr and then turned his furious gaze back to me. The mask had completely shattered. For 6 months, I had seen a man who preached about mutual respect and emotional intelligence. Now, staring across the table, I saw a volatile predator who was losing control of his narrative. He marched around the table, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards. I remained seated, keeping my posture relaxed but vigilant. I knew exactly what was happening. This was classic manipulation tactics meeting cold, hard boundary setting. When a narcissist is denied access to what they want, their first instinct is to induce guilt. When guilt fails, they resort to intimidation. Bradley stood looming over me, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger at my face. You are going to apologize to her right now, he demanded, his voice dropping into a menacing register. You are going to give her the authorization form, and you are going to beg for her forgiveness. I stood up slowly, picking up my purse from the back of the chair. I think it is best if I leave, I stated calmly, turning my back on his tantrum. I took exactly 2 steps before I heard the sharp metallic click of the heavy brass lock on the dining room door. I turned around. Bradley had lunged ahead of me, turning the deadbolt and pulling the brass key from the lock. He slipped the key into his pocket and crossed his arms, blocking my only exit. You are not going anywhere until this is settled, he growled. The dynamic shifted from a toxic family argument to false imprisonment. Brenda abruptly stopped crying, dropping her napkin to watch the scene unfold with a chilling expression of approval. She wanted me subjugated. Bradley stepped toward me, closing the distance. I backed up instinctively until my spine hit the edge of the mahogany credenza. I was cornered. He leaned in close, invading my personal space, his face inches from mine. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath mixed with the sour stench of sudden aggression. Who do you think you are? Bradley spat, spittle flying from his lips. You think because you sit in a cubicle looking at spreadsheets that you are better than us. You are nothing but a selfish dropout. You could not even finish your original degree program before switching to accounting. You are a failure, playing dress-up in a corporate world, and I am the best thing that ever happened to you. His words were meant to cut deep, weaponizing a vulnerability I had shared with him in confidence early in our relationship. I had changed my major in my early 20s, a decision I was proud of, but he was using it to break my spirit. He wanted a terrified, submissive victim. He wanted me to cower, to cry, to beg for release. To appease his mommy, he needed to break me completely. His eyes went dark, completely devoid of the man I thought I knew. He raised his right hand, pulling his fist back. The threat of physical violence hung heavy in the suffocating air. He honestly believed he held all the power. They expected me to flinch. They expected me to shut my eyes and surrender. What neither Bradley nor his mother knew was that for the past 5 years, I had spent 3 mornings a week training in Krav Maga. I did not panic. My heart rate stayed perfectly steady as muscle memory took over. I looked him dead in the eye, maintaining absolute eye contact. I shifted my weight to my left leg, planted my foot firmly against the floorboards, and launched a brutal, calculated front kick directly into his groin. The impact was precise and devastating. Bradley did not even have time to shout. The air rushed out of his lungs in a sharp, guttural wheeze. His raised fist dropped instantly as his hands flew down to clutch himself. His eyes bulged in pure shock and agony before his knees buckled. The supposedly powerful wealth manager crumpled to the floor, gasping for oxygen, curled into a pathetic, whimpering ball at my feet. Brenda shrieked a genuine sound of horror, this time leaping up from her chair and rushing toward her son. I did not spare her a single glance. I calmly reached into my right coat pocket and pulled off the heavy engagement ring. The diamond caught the light of the chandelier one last time before I dropped it directly into Bradley's crystal water glass. It sank to the bottom with a quiet, final clink. I stepped over his trembling body, reached into his jacket pocket, and retrieved the door key. I unlocked the heavy brass door, swung it open, and walked out of the mansion. The cold Seattle rain washed over my face as I marched down the driveway, leaving the nightmare behind me for good. The adrenaline from Sunday night carried me straight through to Monday morning. I did not sleep. I sat in my downtown apartment, watching the Seattle skyline emerge from the gray fog, feeling a profound sense of clarity. The relationship was over, but my professional instincts told me the fallout was just beginning. Predators do not simply walk away when their prey escapes. They retaliate. At exactly 7 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was not a text from Bradley begging for forgiveness. It was an automated push notification from my banking app. A high-priority fraud alert flashed across my screen. My pulse quickened, but my breathing remained perfectly steady. I set my coffee mug down and picked up the device, my mind instantly shifting from jilted fiancé to forensic accountant. The alert pertained to the single joint credit account Bradley and I shared. We had opened it exactly 1 month ago for a very specific purpose. It was supposed to hold the funds required for our wedding venue and caterer deposits. I had transferred $20,000 of my own money into that account to cover the initial planning costs, trusting his promise to match the amount by the end of the month. Instead of a caterer charge, the notification displayed a massive unauthorized withdrawal that triggered the bank's security algorithms. My eyes scanned the digital receipt, analyzing the merchant ID, the timestamp, and the location. The transaction had occurred at a high-end jewelry boutique downtown, a place known for catering to Seattle's elite. The total amount wiped out the entire available credit limit in one single swipe. They had not wasted a single second. While I was walking home in the rain, Bradley was busy planning his immediate financial ambush. This was war. I opened my laptop and bypassed the standard banking portal, accessing the raw transaction ledger through a secure back-end channel I use for professional audits. The data laid out the betrayal in stark, undeniable numbers. Bradley had logged into our joint portal at exactly 8:15 in the morning. He had not attempted to transfer the cash out, likely knowing a massive wire transfer would require dual authorization or trigger an immediate freeze. Instead, he had taken the physical cards straight to a luxury retailer the second their doors opened. The itemized invoice code revealed the exact nature of his purchase. He had bought 2 men's Rolex watches. The total came to $39,500, completely maxing out the $40,000 credit limit. My analytical mind processed the strategy behind the theft. Buying luxury watches was a classic, albeit clumsy method of rapid asset conversion. He could not steal the raw cash without my signature, so he converted my available credit into untraceable high-value physical assets that he could easily pawn or sell on the secondary market. He needed liquid capital, and he needed it fast. The fact that he targeted the wedding fund showed a profound level of desperation and a complete lack of foresight. He was behaving less like a sophisticated wealth manager and more like a cornered gambling addict desperately trying to cover his tracks. A cold, hard anger settled in my chest. He had used my stellar credit score and my hard-earned savings to finance his escape plan. He assumed I would be too devastated by the broken engagement, too embarrassed by the sudden cancellation of our wedding, to notice the financial bleed. He thought I would be curled up in bed crying over the loss of our future, while he walked away with 40 grand in luxury timepieces on my dime. He fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. I did not cry over the stolen money. I simply highlighted the transaction line, exported the data into a fresh encrypted spreadsheet, and began building an airtight case file. Every dollar he stole was a breadcrumb, and I was going to follow that trail right to his front door. The blatant theft was not a victory for him at all. It was a critical error. He had left a digital footprint. And in my world, digital footprints are absolutely lethal. As I compiled the spreadsheet, a notification popped up in the corner of my screen. My voicemail inbox was completely full. I synced my phone to my computer speakers and hit play. Brenda's voice filled my kitchen, sharp, hysterical, and dripping with venom. The first message was left at 2 in the morning. She screamed that I had assaulted her perfect son, demanding I pay his medical bills. The second message, left an hour later, was pure character assassination. She called me a crazy, unmarriable spinster who was lucky Bradley had ever stooped low enough to propose. By the fifth message, her tone shifted from outrage to direct malicious threats. She promised to ruin my reputation in the Seattle social scene. She vowed to call my corporate clients and tell them I was mentally unstable and prone to sudden violent outbursts. "You messed with the wrong family, Gwen," Brenda hissed through the speakers, her voice breaking into a psychotic screech. "You think you can walk away from us? We will make sure you never show your face at another country club event. We will strip you down until you have absolutely nothing left. You are nobody without us." I let the final voicemail play out, listening to the dial tone echo in the silent apartment. She wanted me terrified of social exclusion. She thought the threat of losing my status among Seattle's elite wives would bring me crawling back, begging for her forgiveness. I saved every single audio file into the same encrypted folder containing the stolen credit card data. Her threats were not frightening. They were legally actionable evidence. They believed they were hunting a vulnerable woman, completely unaware that they had just handed a forensic auditor the exact weapons needed to utterly destroy their entire fake little empire. I did not spend the next hour crying over old photographs or packing away engagement gifts. I brewed a second pot of black coffee, tied my hair into a tight knot, and booted up my custom-built workstation. For the past decade, I have made my living dissecting corporate fraud, unspooling embezzlement schemes, and tracking offshore accounts for high-net-worth clients and legal firms. I am a 33-year-old forensic accountant. When corporate executives try to hide stolen millions in shell companies, I am the one who finds the missing ledger entries. When a corrupt board member attempts to launder funds through fake vendor invoices, I am the one who hands the paper trail to the federal authorities. Bradley and Brenda had spent the last 6 months treating me like a naive, eager bride who was completely ignorant of how real money moved. They assumed my job was just balancing basic spreadsheets in a gray cubicle. They had no idea that my daily routine involved dismantling sophisticated financial crimes. I was not a distressed fiancé mourning a lost wedding. I was an apex predator in the financial sector, and my former fiancé had just willingly stepped directly into my hunting ground. My first priority was a complete digital lockdown. I bypassed the consumer-facing banking application and logged directly into the financial clearinghouse portal. Bradley thought he was being clever by converting the $40,000 credit limit into luxury watches. but he left a massive glaring data trail. I pulled the exact serial numbers of the Rolex watches from the boutique digital invoicing system, which was connected to the credit card merchant gateway. With 3 keystrokes, I flagged those specific serial numbers in the global stolen and disputed luxury goods database. If he tried to pawn them, sell them to a broker, or auction them off, the transaction would immediately trigger a police alert. The watches were now completely radioactive. He was holding $40,000 of dead weight. Next, I systematically severed every single financial tie we shared. I froze the compromised credit account, flagging the Rolex purchase as fraudulent activity executed by an unauthorized secondary user after the termination of our relationship. Then I moved to my personal accounts. While Bradley only knew about my standard checking and savings, he was entirely unaware of my actual net worth. Over the years, I had accumulated significant capital through my consulting firm. I initiated an immediate transfer protocol. I swept my entire core wealth, my investment portfolios, my liquid cash, and my emergency funds out of the traditional banking system. I routed every last cent into a highly secure privacy-shielded limited liability company I had established years ago in Delaware. The LLC was bulletproof. It was designed to withstand aggressive corporate audits and litigation. By the time I finished typing the final authentication sequence, my personal banking profile showed a modest, unremarkable balance that barely covered a month of rent. My true assets were locked behind a labyrinth of legal and financial encryption that not even a team of corporate lawyers could penetrate without a federal subpoena. I severed his access to my emergency credit lines, revoked his status as a trusted contact on my insurance policies, and changed every password on my professional and personal networks. I even rerouted my incoming mail to a secure private box. In less than 45 minutes, I had completely erased myself from his financial ecosystem. He could not touch a single dime of my money, and he could not use my credit score to float his lifestyle for another second. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the confirmation screens turn green one by one. The firewall was up. The lockdown was absolute. I was financially untouchable. I took a deep breath, the satisfying hum of my computer processors filling the quiet room. I had successfully insulated my entire life from whatever toxic fallout was about to come. Now that my perimeter was secure, I could shift my focus from defense to offense. I needed to understand exactly why he had made such a catastrophic error. I opened a new window and pulled up his professional profile. I stared at his smiling corporate headshot on his wealth management firm website. Something was fundamentally wrong with this entire scenario. I tapped my pen against my desk, letting my professional instincts analyze the data points. A successful wealth manager making a high six-figure salary does not need to physically intimidate his partner to get access to her personal bank PIN. A thriving financial advisor does not max out a shared wedding credit card at a local jewelry store the moment an engagement ends. Those were the actions of a desperate man. They were the frantic, sloppy maneuvers of someone who needed untraceable liquid cash immediately. Buying luxury watches to pawn is a move utilized by street-level scammers and gambling addicts, not Ivy League-educated financial experts. If Bradley truly managed the massive portfolios he boasted about, he would have access to clean credit lines, bonus structures, or personal capital. Instead, he had risked federal credit card fraud and domestic assault charges just to get his hands on $40,000. A massive red flag unfurled in my mind. Bradley was bleeding money, and he was bleeding it incredibly fast. His polished suits, his leased luxury car, and his mother's opulent Sunday dinners were a carefully constructed facade hiding a massive financial sinkhole. He was drowning in a shadow debt that he could not service through legitimate channels. The demand for my PIN was not about wedding flowers. It was a panicked bailout attempt. I pulled up a specialized financial background check software, typed his social security number from my memory, and hit enter. I was going to find out exactly where the Golden Boy money was really going, no matter what it took to expose his deeply buried and completely destructive financial crimes to everyone. The progress bar on my forensic software had barely reached 10% when my personal cell phone ignited. A rapid, synchronized barrage of notifications flooded the screen, vibrating violently against the granite countertop. It was not a text message or an email. It was a mass alert from Instagram, followed instantly by Facebook and LinkedIn. Bradley had gone live. I clicked the notification, maintaining my clinical detachment as his face filled my screen. He was sitting in Brenda's impeccably decorated living room, dressed in a slightly wrinkled button-down shirt. His hair, usually styled to corporate perfection, was intentionally ruffled. He stared directly into the camera lens with red, puffy eyes. It was a masterclass in predatory manipulation. For the next 3 minutes, I watched my former fiancé deliver a performance worthy of an Academy Award. He choked back perfectly timed tears, his voice cracking, as he spun a breathtakingly malicious narrative. He told his thousands of followers that our relationship had ended because I had suffered a sudden, terrifying psychotic break. He painted a vivid, horrifying picture of a woman losing her grip on reality. According to Bradley, I had violently attacked him completely unprovoked when he gently tried to discuss my mounting wedding stress. He held up his hand, pretending to wipe away a tear before dropping the ultimate lie. He claimed that in my manic state I had stolen his laptop, logged into our shared banking portals, and completely drained our wedding funds. He told the camera that I had stolen all the money meant for our vendors, leaving him heartbroken, physically assaulted, and financially devastated. He ended the broadcast by looking soulfully into the lens, stating that despite the trauma I had inflicted upon him and his mother, he still loved me and prayed I would seek the severe psychiatric help I so clearly needed. The video was a flawless, weaponized strike. He had successfully inverted the roles, positioning himself as the noble, battered survivor and me as the dangerous, unstable thief. The view count skyrocketed by the second. Beneath the video, the comment section exploded with an outpouring of sympathy for the golden boy and absolute vitriol directed at me. He had thrown the first punch in the court of public opinion, ensuring that I would be judged and convicted before I could even speak a word. The social media broadcast acted as a digital flare gun, signaling my immediate excommunication from our shared life. Within exactly 5 minutes of the video going live, the text messages began pouring in. My phone screen quickly became a cascading waterfall of outraged disgust and aggressive demands for accountability from people I had considered close friends. Hannah, my maid of honor, was the first to strike. Her message was long, frantic, and dripping with judgment. She wrote that she could not believe I would physically assault a man who loved me so much, demanding that I immediately return the stolen wedding money and check myself into a psychiatric facility. Next came texts from Olivia and Rachel, the other two bridesmaids. They accused me of being a manipulative sociopath, expressing horror that they had almost stood beside me at the altar. They officially withdrew from the wedding party, blocking my number the second their messages were delivered. The onslaught did not stop with the bridal party. Mutual friends from Bradley's corporate circle, acquaintances from the country club, and even distant relatives sent messages expressing their profound disappointment. People I had hosted for dinner, people whose birthdays I had celebrated, turned on me with terrifying speed. They demanded I issue a public apology to Bradley and Brenda. They threatened to involve the police if I did not return the funds I had allegedly embezzled. The social isolation set in with suffocating swiftness. Bradley knew exactly how the Seattle elite operated. Wealthy social circles protect their own and they abhor scandal. By painting me as a hysterical, violent thief, he had completely alienated me from the network we had built together over the past 6 months. I watched my social standing disintegrate in real time. My phone continued to buzz relentlessly, vibrating with the collective hatred of dozens of people who had swallowed Bradley's narrative without a single question. I was entirely alone. He had weaponized our community against me, isolating me on an island of public disgrace. He expected the overwhelming social pressure to break my resolve. He thought the shame of being branded a crazy, abusive ex-fiancé would force me to surrender, to return his frantic phone calls, and to negotiate a settlement that would cover his massive hidden debts. He believed public, devastating humiliation was the ultimate unbreakable leverage against my sanity and wallet. I did not type a single word in defense. I did not post a frantic response video crying about my absolute innocence. I completely refused to engage in his manufactured internet circus. Let him have the digital sympathy. Let those shallow friends believe I was the villain of the century. If they wanted me to be the monster in their carefully curated socialite fairy tale, I would gladly embrace the role. I prefer cold hard data over internet drama anyway. A social media smear campaign is incredibly loud, but it is ultimately entirely hollow. It evaporates the moment a federal indictment is unsealed. I calmly navigated to the settings on my phone, switched the device to airplane mode, and tossed it onto the granite kitchen counter. The endless vibrating finally ceased, plunging my apartment back into total focused silence. I turned my attention away from the digital noise and looked back at my primary monitor. The forensic background software had completed its initial scan. A dense wall of restricted financial data, public records, and hidden corporate filings illuminated my face in the dark room. The real war was certainly not happening on Instagram. It was happening right here in the numbers. I needed brand new secure hardware to store this massive data pool entirely offline. A digital trace this sensitive required an air-gapped environment completely disconnected from any cloud network. I grabbed my trench coat, slipped on my boots, and walked 4 blocks through the driving Seattle rain to an electronic supply store. I paid cash for a military-grade encrypted external drive and a prepaid burner phone. The entire errand took exactly 47 minutes. I walked back into the lobby of my high-rise building, nodding politely to the concierge, and took the elevator up to the 12th floor. As I stepped out into the quiet carpeted hallway, my professional instincts immediately flared with cold alarm. The heavy oak door to my apartment was resting slightly ajar. I stopped in my tracks, my hand hovering over my pocket. The brass deadbolt assembly was completely destroyed. The surrounding doorframe was fractured, with sharp splinters of wood protruding outward into the corridor. Someone had not picked the lock. They had used brutal, blunt force to shatter the frame and force their way inside. I pressed my back against the corridor wall, carefully regulating my breathing. My Krav Maga training dictated that I should not enter an unsecured, potentially hostile environment, but the absolute silence from within told me the intruders were already gone. I nudged the heavy door open with the toe of my leather boot. The damaged hinges groaned loudly as the door swung wide, revealing the absolute chaos inside. The pristine, highly organized sanctuary I had left less than an hour ago was entirely unrecognizable. I stepped over the threshold, my boots crunching loudly on broken glass from a shattered entryway mirror. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind remained ice cold. This was not a random burglary. This was a targeted physical escalation. I moved systematically through the wreckage of my living room, scanning the destruction with an auditor's precision. The television, a massive OLED screen worth several $1,000s, was still mounted perfectly on the wall. My designer handbags, easily resaleable items that any common thief would grab immediately, were still sitting untouched on their display shelves in the hallway closet. Even my backup laptop, resting in plain sight on the kitchen island, had been completely ignored. Common burglars steal fast, liquid assets. The people who ransacked my apartment were not looking for pawn shop inventory. They were looking for leverage. I walked down the short hallway toward my home office, the crunch of debris echoing under my feet. The door to my office had been ripped off its hinges. Inside, the devastation was incredibly specific. My heavy steel filing cabinets, which housed 7 years of hard-copy tax returns, corporate ledgers, and property deeds, had been violently pried open with a crowbar. Manila folders were shredded, their contents dumped and scattered like snowdrifts across the hardwood floor. Every single piece of paper relating to my financial existence had been touched, tossed, or torn. They had systematically ripped apart my mattress, sliced open the backing of my sofa cushions, and emptied every drawer of my desk. I knelt down amidst the sea of discarded financial paperwork, my eyes darting across the mess. I knew exactly what Bradley and his hired thugs were desperately tearing my apartment apart to find. They were hunting for my physical banking tokens and my cold storage hardware wallet. When I refused to hand over my bank PIN at his mother's dining table, Bradley realized his manipulative charm would no longer work. His backup plan was a brute force physical extraction of my credentials. He needed the physical hardware keys that generated the multi-factor authentication codes for my offshore accounts and LLC holding companies. He thought I was foolish enough to leave those physical tokens hidden in a sock drawer or buried in a jewelry box like an amateur. He severely underestimated my operational security. My hardware wallet, my physical bank tokens, and the master decryption keys for my entire digital ecosystem were locked inside a biometric safe deposit box at a private security firm 3 miles away. They had torn my home to shreds, risked serious felony breaking and entering charges, and left a massive trail of physical evidence, all for absolutely nothing. They found 0 access codes. They found 0 passwords. I stood up from the debris, brushing the dust from my trench coat. Bradley was no longer just a toxic ex-fiancé throwing a tantrum on social media. By hiring people to kick in my door and hunt for my financial keys, he had crossed a terrifying line. He was actively deploying criminal operatives to hunt my assets. He was desperate, bleeding cash, and completely out of control. I stepped back into the hallway and used my burner phone to call the Seattle Police Department. When the uniformed officers arrived, I played the role of the shaken, confused victim perfectly. I filed a standard burglary report, quietly cataloging the extensive property damage and the shattered door frame. I gave them a list of missing low-value items to satisfy the paperwork, but I intentionally left Bradley's name out of the official statement. Filing a loud accusatory report against a prominent wealth manager without concrete proof would only tip him off and spark a messy public legal battle that I could not fully control yet. I needed him to believe that his intimidation tactics were working and that I was too frightened to fight back. I kept the police report completely silent and out of the public eye. I knew I was no longer dealing with a greedy mother-in-law and an entitled son. I was dealing with desperate, highly dangerous people who were willing to use physical violence and criminal associates to steal my wealth. If Bradley was willing to orchestrate a home invasion over a bank PIN, there was no limit to what he might do next. I needed to destroy him completely and permanently. I stepped carefully around the shattered wood of my broken door frame and sat cross-legged on the only untouched surface left in my living room. My secure burner laptop rested on my knees. I needed to monitor the digital tripwires I had set up across my credit profile. While the police were filing their generic burglary report downstairs in the lobby, a new alert flashed across my encrypted email client. It bypassed my standard spam filters because it was sent directly to my private consulting address, an inbox Bradley had only seen over my shoulder once or twice. The sender was listed as Vanguard Apex Financial. My eyes narrowed. Vanguard Apex was not a standard commercial bank or a reputable wealth management firm. They were a notorious, aggressively predatory shadow lending syndicate. They operated in the murky gray area of high-risk bridge loans, offering fast, untraceable liquidity to desperate executives who could no longer secure legitimate financing. They charged extortionate interest rates and required ironclad personal collateral. I ran a quick trace on the email header. It was a legitimate automated correspondence originating from their underwriting department in Chicago. The subject line read, "Urgent verification required for final disbursement." My professional instincts kicked into overdrive. I had locked down my entire credit profile less than 2 hours ago, which meant whatever transaction this email referenced had been initiated days prior. Bradley had not just snapped and maxed out a credit card this morning. He had been laying the groundwork for a massive financial strike long before our explosive Sunday dinner. I quickly clicked the secure link embedded in the email, routing the connection through 3 separate virtual private networks to mask my location. A digital prompt appeared requesting the last 4 digits of my social security number to unlock the attached documents. I typed the numbers with absolute precision. The system accepted the input immediately, confirming my worst suspicion. My most guarded, highly sensitive personal identification data had been compromised and fed directly into a shadow lending network. The screen blinked green, and a massive 60-page portable document format file downloaded straight onto my encrypted drive. I took a deep breath, cracked my knuckles, and opened the file to uncover the exact magnitude of his deception. I knew I was about to find something that would change everything right now. The document was a finalized application for a high-yield, uncollateralized personal bridge loan agreement. I scrolled straight to the loan parameters. The requested disbursement amount was $250,000. The interest rate was a staggering 28%, structured with predatory balloon payments that would bankrupt a normal citizen within 6 months. I scrolled faster, digging into the borrower details. There, printed in stark black and white, was my full legal name. Below it was my home address, my exact date of birth, and my complete social security number. Bradley had completely stolen my identity to secure $250,000 in dirty cash. I carefully examined the supporting documentation attached to the application. He had submitted copies of my previous 2 years of tax returns and heavily redacted profit and loss statements from my forensic accounting firm. That explained the precise targeted destruction in my home office. He had successfully photographed or copied those physical files months ago while I was sleeping, building his fraudulent portfolio in secret. The intruders today were likely searching for the original hard copies to destroy the evidence of his theft. I reached the final page of the contract, the signature block. My breath caught in my throat for a fraction of a second. Right on the dotted line was my signature. It was not a sloppy fake. It was an absolute masterful forgery. He had practiced the exact arch of my letters, the specific pressure of my pen strokes. The document stipulated that the $250,000 would be wired directly into the joint bank account we shared, the exact same account I had just frozen this morning. The loan application had passed their preliminary underwriting. The only thing Vanguard Apex Financial needed to release the $250,000 was a final verbal authorization and the primary account debit PIN to verify the receiving destination. My mind processed the data with terrifying speed. Bradley had legally bound me to a massive toxic debt, using my clean financial reputation as a shield to secure money he could never obtain himself. He positioned himself as the secondary account holder, meaning the moment the funds hit the joint account, he could legally wire the entire $250,000 to an offshore destination, leaving me entirely responsible for the catastrophic debt. The final pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. The explosive confrontation at Brenda's mansion was never about wedding caterers or floral deposits. The demand for my debit PIN was a calculated, desperate bailout attempt. Bradley needed my PIN to provide the final verification to Vanguard Apex Financial. If I had written those 4 numbers on his mother's dining table, he would have triggered the wire transfer immediately. He would have washed $250,000 through my pristine account, stolen it completely, and left me to face the shadow lenders alone. The entire wedding, the expensive ring, the performative Sunday dinners with his mother, it was all an elaborate, meticulously constructed front. Brenda and Bradley were setting me up to be their ultimate financial fall guy. They had groomed me to be the perfect trusting victim who would hand over the keys to her kingdom for the sake of family transparency. They tried to ruin my life, but they made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot that I track financial predators for a living, and now I had the undeniable paper trail to prove it. I smiled, feeling a rush of pure adrenaline. I was finally ready for absolute war against them both, starting right now. I packed my encrypted laptop into a discreet leather tote bag and left my shattered apartment behind. I needed a neutral public location with secure, unmonitored wireless internet to continue compiling my federal fraud dossier. I walked 6 blocks through the morning drizzle to an independent coffee shop tucked away in the financial district. I chose a small corner table facing the entrance, a habit ingrained from years of corporate audits and personal security awareness. I ordered a black espresso, opened my laptop, and began drafting the preliminary outlines for my report to the authorities. The morning rush hour crowd filtered in and out, a sea of gray suits and raincoats. I kept my head down, my fingers flying across the keyboard, completely immersed in the data. Suddenly, a tall shadow fell across my screen, blocking the ambient light from the front windows. My muscles tensed instantly. I shifted my weight, preparing to defend myself against whatever thug Bradley had sent this time. I looked up, my eyes narrowing, fully expecting an enemy. Instead, I saw a familiar, impeccably tailored figure standing at the edge of my table. It was not Bradley. It was not one of his desperate associates. It was DeAndre. He stood there holding two steaming cups of coffee, radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable calm. I slowly pulled my hands away from my keyboard, calculating this unexpected variable. DeAndre was Bradley's brother-in-law. He was married to Madison Bradley's younger sister. In the rigid, performative hierarchy of Brenda's Sunday dinners, DeAndre was the quiet observer who never engaged in their toxic family drama. He simply watched, analyzed, and kept his thoughts strictly to himself. Now he was standing at my table, completely uninvited, right in the middle of a massive, escalating conflict. DeAndre is 36 years old, a highly successful African-American commercial attorney who specializes in corporate mergers and hostile acquisitions. He wore a sharp, charcoal gray suit that signaled power without needing to demand attention. His entire demeanor was a stark contrast to Bradley's flashy, insecure posturing. "Mind if I sit?" DeAndre asked, his voice smooth and professional. Before I could even issue a response, he pulled out the chair opposite mine and sat down, placing one of the coffee cups directly in front of me. "I took the liberty of getting your regular order," he said, maintaining steady eye contact. "We need to talk, Gwen." I kept my expression guarded. "Your brother-in-law just orchestrated a home invasion at my apartment," I stated coldly. "Your mother-in-law left me threatening voicemails. If you are here to serve as their messenger, you can leave the coffee and walk away." DeAndre let out a short, quiet laugh that held absolutely zero humor. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. "I am not here for Bradley, and I am certainly not here for Brenda. Madison and I watched that pathetic, tearful video he posted online this morning. My wife actually threw her phone across the living room in pure disgust. They think they are running a masterclass in public manipulation. We both know they are just exposing their own profound stupidity." His blunt assessment caught me slightly off guard. "You do not believe his story?" I asked, testing his loyalties. "Gwen, I am a commercial litigator," DeAndre replied, his tone razor sharp. "I dissect corporate lies before breakfast. Madison and I have always seen right through the facade. Brenda is a malignant narcissist obsessed with projecting an image of generational wealth she does not actually possess. Bradley is a desperate weak man playing dress-up in a tailored suit. They treat everyone like stepping stones, including Madison. We tolerate the Sunday dinners strictly out of familial obligation, but we have never been blind to their absolute toxicity. When we saw the smear campaign he launched against you today, Madison told me to find you immediately. She knows you are not crazy, and I know you are a forensic accountant. We both know a woman with your specific skill set does not steal wedding funds and run. She freezes assets and prepares for litigation." I studied his face, searching for any sign of a trap. DeAndre met my gaze with total sincerity. He was not playing a family game. He was presenting a strategic alliance. "So why are you really sitting at my table?" I asked, leaning slightly forward. "What is your actual stake in this conflict?" DeAndre uncrossed his arms and reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, sleek silver object and set it down on the table between us. It was an encrypted flash drive. He looked around the coffee shop, ensuring no one was paying attention to our conversation, before speaking in a low, measured voice. "Bradley is drowning," DeAndre stated, laying out the facts with surgical precision. "He tried to borrow $200,000 from me last week for a surefire portfolio. I ran a background check instead. You need to see this. I stared at the flash drive, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly clicking into place. And you declined the investment, I concluded. I am a lawyer, Gwen. I do not hand over multiple six figures based on a desperate pitch from a man who leases his luxury car. DeAndre said, a cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. I leveraged a few contacts in the financial regulatory sector to look into his employment status and his recent transaction history. What I found goes way beyond simple credit card theft or bad investments. He tapped his index finger against the silver flash drive, pushing it an inch closer to my laptop. The information on this drive is the final nail in his coffin. I stared at the small piece of brushed metal resting on the scratched wooden surface of the cafe table. It was a standard biometric encrypted USB drive, the kind favored by corporate espionage consultants and paranoid defense contractors. DeAndre did not push it all the way into my hands. He left it exactly in the center of the table, offering a choice rather than a command. The ambient noise of the coffee shop faded into a dull static buzz as my forensic instincts evaluated the physical exchange. Accepting digital files from a secondary party, especially someone connected to the primary target by marriage, violated several fundamental protocols of data chain custody. A compromised drive could easily deploy a malicious payload, wiping my own secured networks or installing keyloggers to track my investigation. But DeAndre was not an amateur hacker, and he was certainly not a loyal foot soldier for his mother-in-law. He was a high-tier commercial litigator who understood the severe legal ramifications of digital sabotage. I looked from the silver drive up to his dark, unblinking eyes. He was watching my mental calculations with a look of quiet, professional respect. He knew exactly why I was hesitating, and he appreciated the paranoia. Trust is a severe liability in our respective professions. I reached out and let my fingers graze the cold metal casing of the drive. The weight of the object felt disproportionately heavy, loaded with the financial ruin of the man who had tried to destroy me just hours prior. I picked it up and slipped it smoothly into the concealed interior pocket of my heavy trench coat, ensuring it stayed completely separate from my own mobile devices. The battle lines were officially drawn today, and I had just acquired the absolute perfect ammunition now. Why hand this to me? I asked, keeping my voice low. You have the resources to bury him yourself. You could go straight to the regulatory boards. Why use a disgraced ex-fiancé to deliver the execution? DeAndre took a measured sip of his coffee. Madison and I could easily crush him. He admitted, his tone devoid of arrogance. But doing so would trigger a massive familial fallout that Madison does not want to manage from the front lines. Brenda would spend the next decade claiming we betrayed our blood. If you pull the trigger, we remain insulated from the blast radius. We watch the parasite remove himself without getting blood on our suits. It is a clean proxy war, I observed, acknowledging his cold logic. You provide the artillery, I take the recoil. Exactly, DeAndre said. But let us be exceptionally clear, Gwen. I am not handing you this data out of pity. If you were sitting here crying over a broken engagement, I would have kept walking. Pity is useless in a financial crisis. I am giving you this drive because you are a shark backed into a corner, and I know you will bite back hard. I know you are not playing the victim. I offered a razor-sharp smile. I do not play the victim because the math never supports it. Victims wait for apologies. I am drafting a federal indictment. What is the encryption key? DeAndre pulled a crisp business card from his pocket and slid it across the table. It featured a 16-character alphanumeric string written in black ink. Memorize it and burn the card, he instructed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. You have everything you need to end this. Do not miss. I will not, I promised. Tell Madison I appreciate the complete lack of blind family loyalty. DeAndre offered a respectful nod. Happy hunting, Gwen. He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, blending into the gray morning rush of the Seattle financial district. I watched his tailored silhouette disappear behind a wall of umbrellas. I memorized the complex string of characters on the business card, committing the exact sequence of numbers and letters to my memory. I watched the hot flame consume the paper completely. Then I struck a match and burned the thick cardstock in a ceramic ashtray on the table until only fine white ash remained. I packed up my equipment and left the coffee shop, taking a deliberately convoluted route through downtown Seattle to ensure I was not being followed by any of Bradley's desperate associates. I did not return to my ransacked apartment. Instead, I headed straight to a secure co-working space, where I maintained a private windowless office reserved strictly for highly sensitive corporate audits. Once inside, I locked the heavy acoustic door and engaged the deadbolt. The room was practically a concrete bunker, completely devoid of smart devices or listening hazards. I reached into a locked floor safe and retrieved my primary investigation terminal. It was an air-gapped laptop, meaning its wireless network interface controller had been physically removed from the motherboard. It could not connect to the internet, making it entirely impervious to remote hacking or digital surveillance. I booted up the machine, the cooling fans humming loudly in the sterile room. I retrieved the silver flash drive from my coat pocket and inserted it into the designated secure port. The screen immediately flared red, demanding the decryption sequence. I typed the 16-character alphanumeric code from memory with absolute precision and hit enter. The decryption software ground through the heavy layers of security, processing the sophisticated locks DeAndre had applied to protect the payload. A green progress bar crawled across the screen, building the suspense in the quiet, isolated room. I sat perfectly still, my eyes locked on the monitor, my pulse steadying into a calm, predatory rhythm. The final security barrier dissolved, and the master folder cracked open. A massive directory of internal corporate emails, hidden ledger spreadsheets, and redacted transaction logs flooded my screen. I clicked the very first financial summary file, and the real, undeniable truth behind Bradley's entire manufactured existence finally stared back at me. The first document I opened was not a spreadsheet. It was a heavily redacted internal human resources memorandum from his firm, dated exactly 3 months prior. I read the executive summary twice, letting the sheer magnitude of the lie settle over me. Bradley was not a successful wealth manager. He was not a rising star in the competitive Seattle financial sector. He was a ghost. The memorandum detailed his immediate unpaid suspension from the firm. His corporate access had been revoked. His office keycard had been deactivated. His client portfolio had been frozen and reassigned to a senior partner. For the entire second half of our relationship, while we were booking expensive wedding venues and attending lavish Sunday dinners at his mother's mansion, Bradley was completely unemployed. He had been waking up every morning at 6, putting on a bespoke suit, kissing my forehead, and leaving our apartment to go absolutely nowhere. He played the role of the stressed, overworked financial executive, flawlessly complaining about demanding clients and late meetings, when in reality he was likely sitting alone in a local coffee shop or pacing around the city, entirely locked out of his own industry. The memorandum cited severe operational irregularities as the primary cause for his sudden suspension. His firm had flagged multiple unauthorized ledger adjustments and immediately initiated a comprehensive internal audit. The management team had quietly isolated him to prevent a public panic among their high-net-worth clientele while they investigated the scope of the damage. DeAndre had managed to intercept the preliminary findings of that very same ongoing internal audit. I clicked out of the Human Resources file and opened the primary financial directory. I needed to see the exact nature of these irregularities. I needed to know what kind of financial crime forces a man to orchestrate a home invasion against his own fiancé, risking total exposure for a quick cash grab. I sorted the data by transaction value and date, applying a forensic filter to isolate anomalous fund transfers. The screen populated with hundreds of rows of numerical data, and the devastating truth of his career came into sharp focus. Bradley had not made an innocent accounting error or a bad market gamble. He was completely running a massive systematic scheme. I dug directly into the transaction logs. Bradley had targeted a very specific demographic within his portfolio. He had not stolen from corporate accounts or sharp institutional investors who scrutinized quarterly reports. He had specifically preyed upon his oldest, most vulnerable clients. These were elderly widows, retired teachers, and pensioners who trusted him implicitly to manage their life savings. They were people who did not understand complex financial instruments and simply signed whatever authorization forms he placed in front of them, with his charming, reassuring smile, completely trusting him. They believed he was a fiduciary acting in their absolute best interest. I traced the flow of stolen capital step by step. Over the course of 2 years, Bradley had methodically siphoned funds using a network of dummy accounts. He disguised the thefts as standard administrative fees, phantom tax disbursements, and unauthorized portfolio rebalancing costs. He would skim a few $1,000s here, a few hundred there, bleeding the accounts so gradually that the elderly clients never noticed the missing funds on their monthly statements. But the aggregate numbers were staggering. I ran a sum function on the isolated fraudulent transactions. The total calculated at the bottom of my screen hit $1.2 million. $1,200,000 stolen directly from the retirement accounts of hard-working, vulnerable seniors. It was a massive, sickening level of embezzlement. Bradley had built his entire opulent lifestyle on the backs of people who were relying on that money to survive their final years. The leased luxury cars, the designer suits, the expensive dinners, all of it was funded by stolen pensions. My stomach churned with pure disgust. The man I had almost married was a complete sociopath. He possessed zero empathy. He looked elderly clients in the eye, assured them their futures were secure, and then systematically drained their accounts to feed his own vanity. The sheer scale of the theft explained his current state of utter panic. You cannot simply hide a $1.2 million deficit from a team of corporate auditors once they start digging into the raw ledger. The money was gone, and the firm was currently tearing his portfolio apart to find out exactly where it went. I pulled up the timeline of the internal audit, cross-referencing the dates with our relationship milestones. The final document in the directory was an internal legal memo outlining the audit schedule. The firm's investigators were presenting their final conclusive report to the board of directors next Friday. After that, standard corporate protocol dictated they would immediately hand the findings over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The ticking clock was deafening. Bradley had exactly 1 week before he faced multiple federal indictments for wire fraud and embezzlement. That was the missing puzzle piece. That explained the insane, reckless urgency of the past 48 hours. He was frantic. Bradley did not want to marry me. He needed me to serve as a human shield, completely disposable. He was trying to secure the $250,000 shadow loan and access my personal cash reserves to quietly patch the most glaring holes in his client accounts before the auditors finalized their report. He needed my liquid capital to fake a sudden market recovery in the stolen portfolios. When I refused to provide my bank PIN, I essentially signed his federal prison sentence, destroying his only remaining exit strategy. His timeline had completely run out, and the walls were rapidly closing in. He was a cornered animal willing to sacrifice anyone to save himself from the inevitable ruin that awaited him. I knew exactly what a cornered animal looked like on a balance sheet. I poured my third cup of coffee and shifted my focus back to the raw transaction logs. Discovering the $1.2 million deficit was only the first phase of a forensic audit. The second phase is always the most critical. You have to follow the money. I needed to know exactly where that stolen capital had vanished. Traditional corporate embezzlers usually exhibit predictable patterns. They siphon funds to sustain secret addictions, purchase heavily leveraged real estate, or sink the stolen cash into high-risk trading portfolios, trying to become self-made billionaires overnight. Bradley did not fit the profile of a reckless day trader. I engaged a deep packet inspection tool on the encrypted drive DeAndre provided, targeting the outbound routing numbers associated with the dummy accounts. The money had not stayed within the domestic banking system. Bradley had executed a highly sophisticated layering process to wash the stolen funds clean. He broke the massive sum down into hundreds of smaller randomized tranches. He kept every single outbound transfer strictly under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering automatic currency transaction reports. It is a classic money laundering technique known as smurfing, and he executed it flawlessly. I tracked the structured deposits as they moved through a series of temporary holding accounts before jumping international borders. The digital trail led directly to a nested network of offshore financial institutions in the Grand Cayman and the Isle of Man. The funds were heavily obfuscated by multiple layers of corporate anonymity, shielded behind proxy directors and nominee shareholders. Bradley had gone to immense trouble to ensure the money vanished into a black hole of international banking secrecy. A lesser auditor would have hit a brick wall right there. But offshore accounts are simply temporary holding cells. Embezzlers never just leave stolen millions sitting in the Caribbean. They always bring the money back home to spend it. I bypassed the standard ledger view and ran a reverse query on the offshore routing numbers, searching for matching inbound domestic transfers over the past 24 months. The software chugged through the data matching timestamps and currency conversion rates. The offshore accounts were not hoarding the cash. They were acting as a massive automated funnel, bleeding the money back into the United States almost as fast as Bradley was stealing it. I isolated the primary domestic receiving account and ran a search on the beneficiary identification code. The name that populated on my screen hit me with the force of a physical blow. The ultimate beneficiary of the stolen $1.2 million was not Bradley. The money was routed directly into a private wealth management account solely owned and operated by his mother. Brenda was the final destination. I sat completely motionless, my eyes scanning the disbursement logs. The immaculate pearl-wearing matriarch who hosted elegant Sunday dinners and obsessed over country club politics was the true black hole swallowing the stolen funds. But Brenda was not buying designer handbags or funding a lavish retirement. I dug into her personal expenditure reports, tracing where the cash went after it hit her private account. The truth was shocking and incredibly dark. Brenda was a severe, high-stakes gambling addict. The transactions were staggering in their frequency and volume. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being wired out to obscure holding companies that I immediately recognized from previous financial crime investigations. These were not legitimate regulated casinos. These were notorious underground gambling syndicates, operating massive illegal sports betting rings and unregulated high-limit poker rooms across the West Coast and international waters. Brenda was hemorrhaging cash at an apocalyptic rate. She was placing catastrophic bets, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in single weekends, and funding her severe addiction with the stolen retirement savings of her son's elderly clients. The entire family dynamic snapped into terrifying focus. The polished, demanding mother playing the role of a wealthy socialite was actually drowning in dangerous illegal debt. Bradley was not just a greedy executive funding his own vanity. He was a desperate, panicked son who had turned to federal crime to keep his mother from being destroyed by underground loan sharks. When the stolen pension funds finally ran dry and the corporate auditors started asking questions, Brenda's illegal casino markers were called in. That was why they were so aggressively trying to access my personal banking information. The wedding was nothing more than a strategic, calculated financial acquisition. Brenda needed my clean, legitimate capital to settle her massive gambling debts before the syndicate enforcers showed up at her pristine suburban mansion. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the interconnected web of federal crimes illuminating my dark office. The reality was undeniable. Mother and son were not just a toxic, manipulative family. They were active co-conspirators in a massive criminal enterprise. Bradley executed the financial theft and Brenda laundered the proceeds through international gambling rings. Their perfect wealthy family image was a complete mirage, a fragile house of cards built entirely on stolen pensions and severe gambling addiction. They had targeted me because my clean background and significant assets made me the perfect, unsuspecting mark to bail out their collapsing criminal syndicate. They assumed I was just another weak, compliant stepping stone they could bleed dry to save themselves from federal prison and violent debt collectors. They were wrong. I exported the entire offshore routing sequence and Brenda's illicit casino transfer logs into a master encrypted file. I had the complete picture now, every single dirty transaction mapped out with flawless mathematical precision. They wanted to play a high-stakes game with my life, so I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I grabbed my burner phone to call DeAndre. It was time to build a trap they could never escape. I initiated a secure voice call to the burner number DeAndre provided. We agreed to meet an hour later at an industrial park on the outskirts of the city, far from the polished downtown financial district where Bradley Associates operated. I parked my car in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse and slipped into the back of DeAndre's tinted sports utility vehicle. DeAndre was sitting in the driver's seat, his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. Sitting in the passenger seat was a striking African-American woman with an expression of absolute Arctic resolve. This was Madison. She turned around to face me, her gaze sweeping over my trench coat and the heavy laptop bag clutched in my hands. "DeAndre told me you were smart, Gwen," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of any lingering familial sentiment. "He said you found the offshore routing numbers." I nodded, handing her a printed summary of the casino transfers. "I found everything, Madison. Your brother is facing federal embezzlement charges, and your mother is laundering the stolen pensions through illegal gambling syndicates. They tried to use my credit and my identity to secure $250,000 in shadow loans to cover their tracks." Madison did not gasp or cry. She stared at the black and white proof of her family's depravity, and her jaw clenched with pure, unadulterated fury. "I am completely done," she stated, handing the paper back to me. "They have used people their entire lives. They used my father before he died. They tried to use DeAndre. Now they are trying to destroy you to save themselves. We are going to burn their fake empire to the ground, and we are going to do it together." DeAndre pulled a glossy, heavy cardstock envelope from the center console and passed it to the back seat. "This arrived at our house yesterday morning," he explained. "Brenda is refusing to cancel the engagement celebration gala scheduled for this Saturday night at the Harbor Hotel." I stared at the elegant gold foil lettering on the invitation, my forensic mind rapidly calculating her angle. Why would a woman drowning in illegal casino debt insist on hosting a lavish party for an engagement that ended in a physical altercation just 48 hours prior? Madison answered my unspoken question with a harsh, humorless laugh. "It is a massive cash grab," she said. "Mom has been calling every wealthy socialite and corporate executive on that guest list all week. She is telling everyone that the party is moving forward as a celebration of family resilience, and she is actively soliciting direct financial contributions. She claims the funds are for a surprise real estate investment portfolio for you and Bradley. She is asking for checks and wire transfers directly to her holding account." The sheer audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. Brenda was utilizing the high society gala as a desperate, fraudulent fundraising event. She intended to collect hundreds of thousands of dollars in monetary gifts from her wealthy peers and immediately funnel that clean cash straight to the underground casino syndicate to pay off her debt collectors. "She expects you to cave to the social pressure and show up," DeAndre added, looking through the rearview mirror. "Bradley has been spinning a narrative that you had a mental breakdown but are seeking treatment and begging for his forgiveness. They need you to stand on that stage, smile for the cameras, and legitimize the cash grab. If you do not show up, the guests might ask questions and keep their checkbooks closed. They are relying on your fear of public embarrassment to force your compliance." I looked at the glossy invitation, tapping it against my knee. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted an audience of Seattle's elite to witness my submission. I decided right then that I would give them exactly the audience they craved, but the performance would be entirely my own. "We will use their own gala against them," I declared. "We let them gather all their wealthy friends, all of Bradley's remaining clients, and all the local socialites into one room. We lock them in a cage of their own making, With the staging ground selected, I returned to my secure office to forge the ultimate weapon. An arrest warrant requires probable cause, but a swift, devastating federal raid requires absolute mathematical certainty. I spent the next 18 hours locked in my concrete bunker, synthesizing the raw data from DeAndre's flash drive into a master forensic dossier. I did not just highlight the crimes. I mapped the entire criminal anatomy of their operation. I created high-resolution flowcharts, demonstrating exactly how Bradley skimmed the $1.2 million from his elderly client's retirement accounts. I generated chronological ledgers linking his corporate withdrawals directly to Brenda's offshore shell companies. I attached the encrypted routing sequences, proving the money was instantly wired to illegal gambling syndicates on the West Coast. I even included the fraudulent Vanguard Apex loan application, complete with my forged signature, and the metadata showing the document originated from Bradley's home IP address. The resulting dossier was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It was over 200 pages of irrefutable, verified financial evidence. I cross-referenced every federal statute they had violated, including wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and international money laundering. I structured the report so flawlessly that the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation would not even need to launch a preliminary inquiry. They would not have to spend months subpoenaing bank records or interviewing low-level clerks. All the federal prosecutors had to do was read my executive summary, verify the routing numbers, and sign the arrest warrants. I exported the finalized dossier onto a secure physical drive. The trap was fully constructed, loaded with enough federal evidence to put mother and son behind bars for decades. Now I just needed to secure my invitation to their little party. Now I just needed to secure my immediate invitation to their little party. I retrieved my personal cell phone from the kitchen counter, where it had been resting in airplane mode since the smear campaign began. Powering it back on brought a fresh flood of hateful notifications, but I ignored the digital noise and navigated directly to my message thread with Bradley. If I wanted to walk onto that stage on Saturday night, I needed to play the role of the broken, submissive woman he desperately needed me to be. I had to craft a message so perfectly tailored to his arrogance that his greed would completely override his survival instincts. I sat at my kitchen island, flexed my fingers, and began to type the most manipulative, pathetic apology of my entire life. I knew exactly which psychological buttons to push. I wrote that I had been completely overwhelmed by the wedding planning and the intense pressures of my accounting job. I claimed that my physical reaction at Sunday dinner was a massive, shameful overreaction caused by pure exhaustion, not malice. I typed out a long, groveling paragraph about how deeply I regretted hurting his mother, stating that I finally understood Brenda only ever wanted what was best for our future together. Then came the hook, the irresistible financial bait that would absolutely guarantee my access to the gala. I wrote that spending the last few days isolated and alone had made me realize how utterly foolish I was being about family transparency. I told him I wanted to make everything right, not just with empty words, but with tangible actions. I typed the exact sentence I knew would seal his fate. I was too stressed. I overreacted. I want to make this work. I am bringing my full savings portfolio to the gala this weekend to show Brenda I trust her completely with our financial future. I read the message twice, ensuring the tone struck the perfect balance between desperate and financially compliant. I did not ask if I was still allowed to attend the party. I assumed my attendance was still desired, framing my arrival as a grand public gesture of financial submission. I hit send and watched the text message bubble turn blue. The trap was officially set. All I had to do was sit back and wait for the starving predator to take a massive bite. The digital read receipt appeared at the bottom of the screen almost instantaneously. He was waiting by his phone, likely sweating over his impending audit deadline, desperate for a lifeline. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, and reappeared in rapid succession. He was eager, but he was trying to carefully craft his response to maintain his artificial position of power. Exactly 4 minutes later, my screen lit up with a massive block of text. Bradley swallowed the bait whole. His response was a masterpiece of narcissistic condescension, dripping with fake forgiveness and aggressive patronization. He started by stating how incredibly difficult the last few days had been for him and his mother, emphasizing the severe emotional trauma my violent outburst had allegedly caused them. He wrote that while my actions were completely unacceptable and highly disturbing, he always knew my true heart. He claimed he had spent the entire week defending my character to his wealthy friends, telling everyone that my psychotic break was just a temporary lapse in judgment caused by my inability to handle high society pressures. Then he moved to the financial validation. He told me that bringing my savings portfolio to the engagement gala was exactly the kind of mature, responsible decision he had been waiting for me to make. He wrote that Brenda was still deeply wounded, but because she possessed such a generous, forgiving spirit, she was willing to accept my financial transparency as a formal apology. He instructed me to arrive at the hotel ballroom promptly at 7, demanding I wear the designer silk gown he had purchased for me so I could look presentable in front of his important corporate clients. He finished the message with a sickeningly sweet declaration of his enduring love, promising that once I handed over the account access, we could put this ugly chapter behind us and focus on building our wealthy empire together. He even added that he would personally escort me to the stage so I could hand the portfolio directly to his mother in front of the entire audience, framing it as a beautiful moment of family healing. His massive ego was a fatal flaw. The sheer arrogance of his response was truly staggering. He was dictating the terms of my surrender, completely oblivious to the absolute fact that he was actively orchestrating his own highly public, devastating federal execution. I locked the screen of my phone and set it face down on the cool granite kitchen counter, allowing a slow, razor-sharp smile to spread across my face. It is utterly fascinating how predictably a narcissist will behave when you present them with an offering of money and a stroke to their fragile ego. They are fundamentally incapable of recognizing a trap because their inherent delusion of grandeur convinces them they are the smartest person in any room. Bradley never stopped to question why an analytical, independent forensic accountant would suddenly experience a total personality reversal and willingly surrender her core assets. He simply believed his own fabricated narrative. He truly thought his smear campaign had successfully broken my spirit, isolating me so severely that I was crawling back to beg for his validation. By giving him exactly what he demanded to hear, I completely neutralized his survival instincts. He was so blinded by the prospect of accessing a fresh influx of untraceable capital to cover his massive embezzlement tracks that he abandoned all basic operational security. He thought he was reeling in a defeated victim. He had no idea he was dragging a live grenade directly into his own sanctuary. The day before the gala arrived with a crisp chill that perfectly matched my cold resolve. The engagement party was exactly 36 hours away. As I was reviewing the final synchronization protocols for my encrypted presentation, my burner phone lit up. It was a new voicemail from Brenda. She had bypassed text messaging, entirely preferring to deliver her final victory speech with her own voice. I tapped the screen and let the audio fill my sterile office. "Gwen, darling." Brenda began, her tone dripping with an absolutely sickening level of triumphant condescension. "Bradley told me the wonderful news this morning. I must admit I am incredibly relieved to see you have finally come back to your senses. We all have moments of weakness, and your little outburst was certainly a severe lapse in judgment. However, as the matriarch of this family, I believe in grace. I am willing to accept your financial portfolio tomorrow night as a formal demonstration of your renewed loyalty to our family values." She paused, letting a sharp, exasperated sigh escape her lips before continuing her demands. "Since you will be standing on my stage presenting your apology in front of Seattle's most influential investors, I expect you to look the part. Please ensure your hair is professionally styled. Do not wear that awful red lipstick you prefer. Stick to neutral tones. We need you looking stable, subdued, and perfectly presentable for Bradley's colleagues. See you tomorrow, Gwen. Do not be late. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. She was already treating me like a compliant, defeated dog she had successfully brought to heel. Brenda honestly believed her psychological manipulation had broken me. She was so intoxicated by the prospect of acquiring my liquid capital to pay off her illegal casino debts that she completely ignored the glaringly obvious threat. While Brenda was busy dictating my wardrobe, Bradley was hard at work cementing his own fabricated narrative across our entire social network. He did not simply accept my fake apology in private. He immediately weaponized it to stroke his massive, fragile ego. I unlocked my old personal phone, which I had kept completely silent for days, and opened the massive group chat containing all of our mutual friends, former bridesmaids, and his corporate acquaintances. Bradley had sent a massive, deeply manipulative message to the group at 8 in the morning. He announced that after days of intense, tearful begging on my part, he had magnanimously decided to call off the breakup. He wrote that my severe psychiatric episode had finally subsided and that I was completely overwhelmed with shame for my erratic behavior. He explicitly detailed how I had crawled back to him pleading for a second chance and offering full financial transparency to prove my devotion to him and his mother. The replies from our supposed friends poured in by the dozens. They showered Bradley with absolute adoration. They called him a saint for his endless patience. They praised his incredible emotional intelligence for standing by a broken, unstable woman during her darkest psychological crisis. One former bridesmaid even commented that my willingness to hand over my savings to Brenda was the only acceptable way I could ever make amends for my violent, abusive actions. Bradley soaked up every single drop of their digital worship. He replied to their comments with fake humility, stating that true love requires profound sacrifice, and that he was just doing his duty as a protective, forgiving partner. He was constructing a towering monument to his own perfection right in front of the very people he was actively embezzling from. Several of the individuals praising his character in that group chat were the exact same clients whose retirement funds he had ruthlessly drained to cover Brenda's gambling debts. He was accepting their praise while actively destroying their financial futures. The level of sheer unadulterated sociopathy required to maintain that facade was truly breathtaking. He was absolutely convinced that he had won. He believed he had successfully crushed my spirit, secured his stolen capital, and preserved his flawless public image all in one masterful sweep. I did not reply to the group chat. I did not send a single text message to correct their repulsive, sycophantic praise. I let them bathe in their collective delusion. I simply locked the phone and tossed it back onto the counter. I had no interest in winning a meaningless argument on the internet when I was 24 hours away from deploying a federal indictment. I treated the impending destruction of their lives with the exact same detached clinical precision I applied to a routine corporate board meeting. I left my secure office and spent the rest of my Friday afternoon quietly executing Brenda's dress code demands to the letter. I went to an upscale salon downtown and sat in absolute silence while a stylist washed, blew out, and pinned my hair into a flawless, subdued chignon. I visited my regular manicurist, requesting a sheer neutral polish that projected quiet elegance. I did not speak about weddings or engagements. I simply reviewed my forensic spreadsheets in my mind, verifying every routing number and offshore holding company account code. When I returned to my apartment, I pulled the designer silk gown Bradley had purchased for me out of its protective garment bag. I steamed it meticulously, ensuring not a single wrinkle marred the fabric. I carefully packed my encrypted presentation drive into a sleek, minimalist leather clutch double, checking the connection port. I was silently preparing my final armor. These two criminals wanted me to arrive looking like a broken, submissive prize, fully ready to hand over my hard-earned wealth to save their collapsing criminal enterprise. I would give them exactly the aesthetic they demanded down to the very last detail. I would walk into that massive luxury ballroom looking absolutely perfect, calm, and collected, right before I systematically burned their entire fraudulent existence to ashes. While I finalized my physical appearance for the gala, DeAndre was quietly orchestrating the federal deployment. As a high-level commercial litigator, he did not rely on anonymous tip lines or generic reporting portals to expose financial crimes. He had direct, secure channels to the exact people who dismantled corrupt empires for a living. At 9 in the morning on Saturday, DeAndre walked into a secure federal building downtown. He bypassed the front desk and took a private elevator to the white-collar crime division. He had arranged a highly classified morning meeting with Special Agent Reynolds, a veteran investigator specializing in massive corporate embezzlement and offshore money laundering. DeAndre did not just drop a flash drive on the agent's desk. He presented the complete, meticulously structured forensic dossier I had built. He walked the federal agents through the complex web of offshore holding companies, the falsified tax disbursements, and the illegal transfer logs flowing directly into Brenda's underground casino accounts. He laid out the exact mathematical proof that Bradley had diverted $1.2 million from elderly pensioners. DeAndre also provided the unassailable evidence of the fraudulent Vanguard Apex loan application, completely exposing their attempt to use my stolen identity for a shadow bailout. Because my financial mapping was absolutely flawless, the federal agents did not have to waste weeks securing preliminary subpoenas or building a circumstantial case. The evidence was overwhelming, verified, and immediately actionable. The SEC representatives in the room confirmed the violations of fiduciary duty and securities fraud within minutes of reviewing the ledger data. The magnitude of the theft, combined with the imminent flight risk posed by the massive amount of liquid cash Brenda was attempting to solicit at the gala, elevated the case to an immediate critical threat level. DeAndre made it abundantly clear that Bradley and Brenda were operating an active, ongoing criminal enterprise that required swift intervention. The federal prosecutors reviewed my digital trail, confirmed the offshore routing numbers, and immediately fast-tracked the necessary arrest warrants. The gears of the federal justice system, which usually grind with agonizing slowness, engaged with terrifying localized speed. DeAndre had successfully weaponized the entire legal apparatus against his own mother-in-law and brother-in-law, ensuring their total destruction was sanctioned, sealed, and approved by a federal judge before the first bottle of champagne was even uncorked at their fraudulent party. With the federal warrants officially signed, DeAndre shifted his focus to the precise tactical coordination of the impending raid. He called me on my secure burner phone at noon to finalize our operational timeline. We needed absolute synchronization. The authorities wanted to secure the perimeter of the Seattle Hotel ballroom to prevent any potential flight risk, especially since Bradley was fully aware his internal corporate audit was closing in. However, I needed a highly specific window of uninterrupted time inside that ballroom before the agents breached the doors. I had to personally deliver the financial execution in front of their wealthy peers and investors to ensure their social and professional destruction was absolute. DeAndre understood the assignment perfectly. He negotiated a strict operational window with Special Agent Reynolds. The federal strike team would arrive at the luxury hotel in plain clothes and secure all the primary loading docks, kitchen exits, and lobby elevators by 8 o'clock in the evening. They would establish a completely sealed perimeter, effectively locking Bradley and Brenda inside their own opulent trap. DeAndre and I established a hard timeline for the internal execution. I would arrive at the gala at exactly 7. Brenda had scheduled her grand welcome speech and the formal presentation of my supposed financial apology for 7:45. That gave me exactly 15 minutes to hijack the narrative and display the forensic evidence to the entire audience. We set a definitive physical signal. DeAndre would be standing near the main ballroom entrance. The moment I dropped the microphone and concluded the slide presentation, he would text the Federal Task Force commander waiting in the hotel lobby. That text message would be the green light for the raid team to don their tactical jackets, breach the main ballroom doors, and execute the arrest warrants publicly. There was zero margin for error. If the agents moved too early, Bradley and Brenda might play the victim of government overreach. If I took too long, Bradley might sense the trap and attempt to escape through the service corridors. DeAndre assured me the perimeter was airtight and the agents were fully briefed on the layout of the venue. We synchronized our watches down to the exact second. The tactical precision of the plan was cold calculated and breathtakingly efficient. The predators who thought they were hosting a lucrative celebration were actually walking blindly into a highly coordinated, federally sanctioned ambush. I ended the call and turned my attention to my presentation. I sat in my quiet apartment and clicked through the final slide deck one last time. Every high-resolution image was perfectly optimized for a projector screen. The first slide detailed Brenda's staggering $450,000 underground casino debt. The second slide mapped the exact routing numbers of Bradley's $1.2 million corporate embezzlement scheme. The final slide displayed the forged Vanguard Apex shadow loan application bearing my stolen Social Security number. It was a flawless visual narrative of their complete criminal depravity. I exported the finalized presentation file from my air-gapped laptop and loaded it directly onto a discreet, high-powered wireless video transmitter. The device was no larger than a tube of lipstick designed to override and hijack commercial projector signals instantly without needing a hardwired connection. I slipped the small black transmitter into my sleek leather clutch right next to my burner phone. I took a final look in the mirror, checking my subdued, perfectly styled hair and my elegant silk gown. The armor was fully secured. The weapons were loaded. It was time to go to the party. While I finalized my physical appearance for the gala, DeAndre was quietly orchestrating the federal deployment. As a high-level commercial litigator, he did not rely on anonymous tip lines or generic reporting portals to expose financial crimes. He had direct, secure channels to the exact people who dismantled corrupt empires for a living. At 9 in the morning on Saturday, DeAndre walked into a secure federal building downtown. He bypassed the front desk and took a private elevator to the white-collar crime division. He had arranged a highly classified morning meeting with Special Agent Reynolds, a veteran investigator specializing in massive corporate embezzlement and offshore money laundering. DeAndre did not just drop a flash drive on the agent's desk. He presented the complete, meticulously structured forensic dossier I had built. He walked the federal agents through the complex web of offshore holding companies, the falsified tax disbursements, and the illegal transfer logs flowing directly into Brenda's underground casino accounts. He laid out the exact mathematical proof that Bradley had diverted $1.2 million from elderly pensioners. DeAndre also provided the unassailable evidence of the fraudulent Vanguard Apex loan application, completely exposing their attempt to use my stolen identity for a shadow bailout. Because my financial mapping was absolutely flawless, the federal agents did not have to waste weeks securing preliminary subpoenas or building a circumstantial case. The evidence was overwhelming, verified, and immediately actionable. The SEC representatives in the room confirmed the violations of fiduciary duty and securities fraud within minutes of reviewing the ledger data. The magnitude of the theft, combined with the imminent flight risk posed by the massive amount of liquid cash Brenda was attempting to solicit at the gala, elevated the case to an immediate critical threat level. DeAndre made it abundantly clear that Bradley and Brenda were operating an active, ongoing criminal enterprise that required swift intervention. The federal prosecutors reviewed my digital trail, confirmed the offshore routing numbers, and immediately fast-tracked the necessary arrest warrants. The gears of the federal justice system, which usually grind with agonizing slowness, engaged with terrifying localized speed. DeAndre had successfully weaponized the entire legal apparatus against his own mother-in-law and brother-in-law, ensuring their total destruction was sanctioned, sealed, and approved by a federal judge before the first bottle of champagne was even uncorked at their fraudulent party. With the federal warrants officially signed, DeAndre shifted his focus to the precise tactical coordination of the impending raid. He called me on my secure burner phone at noon to finalize our operational timeline. We needed absolute synchronization. The authorities wanted to secure the perimeter of the Seattle Hotel ballroom to prevent any potential flight risk, especially since Bradley was fully aware his internal corporate audit was closing in. However, I needed a highly specific window of uninterrupted time inside that ballroom before the agents breached the doors. I had to personally deliver the financial execution in front of their wealthy peers and investors to ensure their social and professional destruction was absolute. DeAndre understood the assignment perfectly. He negotiated a strict operational window with Special Agent Reynolds. The federal strike team would arrive at the luxury hotel in plain clothes and secure all the primary loading docks, kitchen exits, and lobby elevators by 8 o'clock in the evening. They would establish a completely sealed perimeter, effectively locking Bradley and Brenda inside their own opulent trap. DeAndre and I established a hard timeline for the internal execution. I would arrive at the gala at exactly 7. Brenda had scheduled her grand welcome speech and the formal presentation of my supposed financial apology for 7:45. That gave me exactly 15 minutes to hijack the narrative and display the forensic evidence to the entire audience. We set a definitive physical signal. DeAndre would be standing near the main ballroom entrance. The moment I dropped the microphone and concluded the slide presentation, he would text the Federal Task Force commander waiting in the hotel lobby. That text message would be the green light for the raid team to don their tactical jackets, breach the main ballroom doors, and execute the arrest warrants publicly. There was zero margin for error. If the agents moved too early, Bradley and Brenda might play the victim of government overreach. If I took too long, Bradley might sense the trap and attempt to escape through the service corridors. DeAndre assured me the perimeter was airtight and the agents were fully briefed on the layout of the venue. We synchronized our watches down to the exact second. The tactical precision of the plan was cold calculated and breathtakingly efficient. The predators who thought they were hosting a lucrative celebration were actually walking blindly into a highly coordinated, federally sanctioned ambush. I ended the call and turned my attention to my presentation. I sat in my quiet apartment and clicked through the final slide deck one last time. Every high-resolution image was perfectly optimized for a projector screen. The first slide detailed Brenda's staggering $450,000 underground casino debt. The second slide mapped the exact routing numbers of Bradley's $1.2 million corporate embezzlement scheme. The final slide displayed the forged Vanguard Apex Shadow Loan application bearing my stolen Social Security number. It was a flawless visual narrative of their complete criminal depravity. I exported the finalized presentation file from my air-gapped laptop and loaded it directly onto a discrete, high-powered wireless video transmitter. The device was no larger than a tube of lipstick designed to override and hijack commercial projector signals instantly, without needing a hardwired connection. I slipped the small black transmitter into my sleek leather clutch right next to my burner phone. I took a final look in the mirror, checking my subdued, perfectly styled hair and my elegant silk gown. The armor was fully secured. The weapons were loaded. It was time to go to the party. The signal was given. Bradley quickly recovered from his awkward misstep, his professional smile snapping back into place as if nothing had happened. He placed a guiding hand on the small of my back, attempting to steer me toward the center stage, where a microphone stand waited under a spotlight. Brenda was already there, gesturing for the string quartet to stop playing. She clapped her hands together, her heavy diamond bracelets catching the light, and called for the room's attention. The lively chatter of the wealthy guests slowly faded into an expectant silence as all eyes turned toward the stage. Bradley stepped up to the microphone and grabbed a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter. He tapped a silver spoon against the crystal rim. The sharp, clear chime echoed through the massive ballroom, demanding absolute focus from the crowd of investors, socialites, and oblivious clients. "Thank you all for joining us tonight." Bradley began, his voice projecting smooth, practiced charisma across the sea of faces. "This evening was originally supposed to be a simple celebration of our upcoming wedding. But as many of you know, this past week has tested us. It has brought unexpected challenges and profound emotional hurdles that required immense grace to overcome." He paused, looking down at me with a sickeningly paternal expression. He was playing the savior perfectly. "But we are standing here tonight to prove that love conquers all obstacles. We are here to raise a glass to forgiveness, to the unbreakable bonds of family, and to a very wealthy, secure future together." He smiled warmly and extended his hand, offering the microphone to me. He expected a broken, submissive apology. He anticipated that I would publicly surrender my financial independence right there on the stage to secure his forgiveness. I stepped up to the microphone, feeling the heavy leather clutch in my hand. I took the microphone from his outstretched hand. The cold metal felt grounding against my palm. I looked out at the audience. Hundreds of expectant faces stared back at me, waiting for the dramatic, tearful confession of a mentally unstable woman begging for readmittance into high society. I saw the elderly pensioners standing near the back, the very people whose life savings were currently paying for the caviar and champagne they were consuming. I saw Brenda standing to my right, her chest puffed out with victorious pride, ready to accept my financial portfolio as a tribute. I saw Bradley hovering just behind my left shoulder, exuding the smug confidence of a predator who believed he had successfully cornered his prey. I did not tremble. I did not shed a single tear. I held the microphone perfectly steady and let a long, calculated moment of absolute silence stretch across the enormous ballroom. The tension grew palpable. People began to shift uncomfortably in their formal wear. I looked directly at Brenda, who stood waiting with greedy anticipation, then shifted my gaze to Bradley, letting a chilling, predatory calm settle over my features. Bradley is actually right about one thing, I said, my voice echoing crisp and clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. Let us talk about true wealth, and precisely where it actually goes. I unclasped my leather clutch and reached inside. I bypassed the cell phone and my lipstick, wrapping my fingers around the small black wireless video transmitter. It was completely undetectable to anyone watching. I pressed the activation button hidden on its side. The device instantly overrode the hotel's audiovisual network with a silent, invisible surge of data. The massive projector screen suspended high above the stage behind us had been playing a continuous looping montage of our fake, heavily curated engagement photos. It showed pictures of us smiling on yachts, toasting at expensive restaurants, and walking hand in hand through perfectly manicured parks. It was a digital monument to their carefully constructed lies. I kept my thumb pressed firmly against the remote trigger, engaging the bypass protocol I had programmed just hours earlier. I did not break eye contact with the crowd as I prepared to pull the curtain down on their entire fraudulent existence. The massive projector screen behind the stage flickered violently, emitting a sharp electronic buzz that made several guests jump. The romantic engagement montage vanished instantly, replaced by a harsh, blinding white light. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom as the first slide of my forensic dossier illuminated the space in staggering high-resolution detail. I had blown up the documents to massive proportions, ensuring that every single number, date, and routing code was completely legible to the people standing at the very back of the room. The screen displayed a perfectly mapped flowchart of Brenda's offshore financial activity. Giant, undeniable graphics linked her supposedly pristine holding company directly to illegal underground casino syndicates. The red text on the screen highlighted her catastrophic gambling losses, documenting over $450,000 in outstanding criminal debt. Before the crowd could even process the shock of the first image, I clicked the remote again. The screen transitioned with brutal speed to a new set of data. This time it displayed Bradley's internal corporate audit files side by side with the fraudulent wire transfers he had executed. The slides clearly showed the names of the elderly clients in the room, mapping the exact trajectory of their stolen retirement funds as they were siphoned out of their legitimate portfolios and funneled into the offshore accounts used to pay off Brenda's casino markers. The undeniable proof of a $1.2 million embezzlement scheme hovered above our heads, casting a harsh, glaring light over the ice sculptures and the floral arrangements. The financial execution had officially begun, and their dark, secret reality was now fully exposed for the entire world to see, without any shadows left to hide behind. The carefully constructed mirage of their elite status shattered into pieces. The carefully constructed mirage of their elite status shattered into pieces. Total pandemonium erupted across the Grand Pacific Ballroom. A crystal champagne flute slipped from a prominent real estate developer's hand, shattering against the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed the immediate destruction of Bradley's career. The polite, hushed murmurs of high society instantly morphed into a chaotic, uncontrollable wave of panicked shouts, aggressive pointing, and breathless gasps. I stood entirely still in the center of the stage, anchoring the room with absolute authority. I gripped the microphone, my voice cutting through the rising uproar with cold, calculated precision. "Brenda, you called me selfish for withholding my PIN," I asked, projecting my voice so every single syllable reached the furthest corners of the hall. "Here is your $450,000 casino debt." I clicked the hidden remote in my clutch, advancing to the next slide. It displayed a massive, highlighted ledger of her underground wire transfers to illegal gambling syndicates. "You told your friends I was having a psychotic break." I continued, my gaze locked onto her horrified, trembling face. "You spent this entire evening soliciting checks and wire transfers from these wealthy guests, claiming you were building a surprise real estate portfolio for our future. That was a lie. You were desperately trying to launder their generous engagement gifts directly to offshore loan sharks before they came to collect." The crowd physically recoiled from her. The wealthy socialites who had just handed Brenda envelopes thick with cash suddenly realized they had been masterfully grifted. I narrated the financial data flawlessly, pointing out the exact dates and times Brenda had hemorrhaged hundreds of thousands of dollars at unregulated poker tables. I laid bare her pathetic, desperate reality. She was not a wealthy matriarch guiding a prestigious family legacy. She was a broke, spiraling addict who viewed her son's engagement party as nothing more than a highly lucrative, fraudulent fundraiser. Brenda clutched her chest, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form a coherent denial, but the glowing red numbers projected behind her completely suffocated any lie she could possibly invent. The undeniable truth was permanently burned into the retinas of every single person she had spent decades trying to impress. I did not give the room a single second to recover. I turned my full, devastating attention toward my former fiancé. He was frozen, his face drained of all color, staring up at the screen like a man watching his own execution. "And Bradley, you called me crazy?" I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal razor-sharp register. "Here is the exact routing of the $1.2 million you embezzled from widows and pensioners." I clicked the remote again. The screen shifted to display the internal human resources memorandum, confirming his unpaid suspension placed right next to the illegal transfer logs. The absolute horror rippling through the ballroom was palpable. Several elderly guests standing near the raw bar began to weep, clutching their spouses, as they recognized their own account numbers flashed across the massive projector screen. They realized in real time that their entire life savings, the money they had trusted this charismatic wealth manager to protect, had been systematically stolen to feed his mother's gambling addiction. "You orchestrated a vicious, highly public smear campaign against my mental health to cover up your federal crimes," I announced to the paralyzed crowd. "When I refused to hand over my life savings to patch the massive hole in your fraudulent ledger, you panicked. You broke into my apartment. You hired criminals to hunt for my hardware wallets." I clicked the remote one final time, bringing up the Vanguard Apex Shadow Loan application. "You even forged my signature to secure $250,000 in predatory loans under my Social Security number. You thought you could use me as a disposable shield to survive your impending corporate audit. You thought I was just a naive, submissive woman who would crumble under the weight of an Instagram video and a few lost friends. You fundamentally forgot who I am and what I do for a living. I hunt financial predators, Bradley. And you left a digital footprint so massive it could be seen from space." The sheer magnitude of his betrayal settled heavily over the luxurious ballroom. His corporate clients, the men and women who had praised his character just days ago on social media, now looked at him with pure, unadulterated revulsion. The golden boy of Seattle wealth management was utterly exposed as a desperate, reckless thief. The realization that his life was completely over finally snapped Bradley out of his paralyzed stupor. Panic consumed him entirely. He let out a feral, desperate shout and lunged toward the back of the stage, frantically tearing at the heavy black cables connecting the hotel audiovisual system to the projector. He pulled wildly at the wires, trying to manually sever the power and plunge the room into darkness to hide the damning evidence still glowing above him. Brenda completely lost her mind. The elegant pearl-wearing socialite vanished, replaced by a shrieking, hysterical woman. She grabbed the edge of the stage, screaming at the top of her lungs for hotel security to cut the microphone and forcefully remove me from the premises. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice cracking in pure desperation. "Arrest her. She is lying." But no one moved to help them. The hotel staff stood frozen in shock, and the wealthy guests actively stepped back, creating a wide circle of isolation around the disgraced mother and son. The magnificent, impenetrable facade they had spent decades building shattered completely, leaving them exposed, humiliated, and completely trapped in the wreckage of their own criminal greed. The heavy projector cables sparked and hissed as Bradley yanked them from the wall socket with brute force, but the massive screen did not go dark. I had anticipated his panic and routed the transmission through the hotel redundant emergency audiovisual backup system. The high-resolution evidence of his federal crimes remained blazing above the stage, illuminating his sweaty, terrified face. Bradley dropped the frayed cables and spun around to face his audience. He looked at the elderly widows he had swindled. He looked at the tech executives he had schmoozed just an hour prior. He looked at the elite society members who had worshipped his fake online apology video that very morning. There was absolutely zero sympathy in their eyes. They looked at him with the cold, hard detachment reserved for a convicted criminal. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. His lucrative career was completely annihilated. His carefully curated reputation was reduced to toxic ash. The country club memberships, the bespoke suits, the luxury leased vehicles, everything was entirely gone. He was no longer a respected wealth manager. He was a cornered felon facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Survival instinct completely overrode his performative loyalty. He did not grab Brenda by the hand to pull her away from the stage. He did not try to shield his mother from the angry crowd closing in around them. He abandoned her instantly. Bradley shoved past a wealthy investor, knocking a tray of champagne from a passing waiter. Crystal flutes shattered across the Italian marble floor as he bolted. He ignored the shouting and the chaos, locking his eyes entirely on the heavy mahogany double doors at the rear of the ballroom. That exit led directly to the service corridors, the kitchen loading docks, and the dark alleyways of downtown Seattle. He thought he could slip out the back, steal a vehicle, and disappear before the financial regulators could freeze his passport. He pushed through the terrified guests with the reckless momentum of a man fleeing a burning building. He reached the back of the room, his breath ragged, his perfectly tailored tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder from shoving past his former friends. He threw his entire body weight against the right side of the heavy mahogany door, expecting it to swing open into the dark, empty safety of the hotel service hallway. The heavy door refused to budge even an inch. Bradley hit the solid wood with a dull thud, letting out a frustrated groan. He grabbed the brass handle and pulled frantically, rattling the metal mechanism with mounting hysteria. The door finally swung outward, but it did not reveal an empty escape route. A towering, impeccably dressed figure stepped directly out of the shadows of the service corridor and planted himself firmly in the center of the threshold. It was DeAndre. He stood with his arms crossed over his broad chest, his stance completely immovable, projecting the calm, lethal authority of a man who held all the winning cards. "Going somewhere?" DeAndre asked, his voice smooth, low, and completely devoid of warmth. Bradley recoiled, his eyes darting frantically around the exit. "DeAndre, get out of my way!" Bradley demanded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "You do not understand what that crazy woman just did. She faked those documents. You have to let me pass." DeAndre let out a sharp, cold laugh that cut right through Bradley and his pathetic lie. "Madison and I read the raw ledger data yesterday morning," DeAndre stated, stepping forward and forcing his brother-in-law to backpedal into the ballroom. "You tried to hit me up for $200,000 to cover your embezzlement tracks. You used your own mother as a money mule for illegal casinos. You really thought I would let you walk out of this building and drag our family name through a massive international manhunt? Bradley looked at the man he had always dismissed as a quiet background character at Sunday dinners. He finally realized DeAndre was the silent architect of his absolute entrapment. Before Bradley could attempt to push past him or formulate another useless lie, a deafening sound pierced through the heavy glass of the ballroom windows. The piercing, unmistakable wail of multiple federal sirens echoed down the Seattle city streets, growing rapidly louder as they swarmed the perimeter of the luxury hotel. Brilliant flashes of harsh red and blue strobe lights painted the ballroom walls, cutting through the warm, elegant glow of the crystal chandeliers. The federal raid team had arrived exactly on schedule. Bradley spun around in absolute terror as the main lobby doors at the front of the ballroom burst open with coordinated tactical force. A dozen plainclothes federal agents wearing heavily armored tactical vests, stamped with stark yellow lettering, flooded into the room. The lead agent held up a federal warrant badge, his voice booming with absolute authority over the panicked crowd. "Nobody move," the lead agent ordered, scanning the massive room before pointing directly at the stage. "Federal Bureau White Collar Division. We have federal warrants for the immediate arrest of Bradley and Brenda." The crowd parted instantly, leaving a wide, clear path between the federal agents and the stage. The ultimate cinematic payoff unfolded with breathtaking precision. I stood perfectly still at the microphone, watching the tactical team move in with synchronized efficiency. They did not ask polite questions, they did not negotiate. Two heavily armed agents marched straight toward the rear exit, grabbing Bradley by his torn tuxedo jacket and slamming him roughly against the mahogany doorframe. They kicked his legs apart and forced his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoing through the silent ballroom was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Bradley thrashed against the heavy mahogany doorframe, his custom tuxedo ripping further at the seams as the federal agents locked the steel cuffs tightly around his wrists. The polished wealth manager was reduced to a sweating, desperate criminal shouting panicked demands for his attorney. Across the ballroom, the scene was even more pathetic. Brenda realized her immaculate social standing had just been incinerated in front of Seattle's most elite investors. Her knees buckled beneath the weight of her glittering emerald ball gown. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, her expensive pearl necklace snapping and scattering white beads across the tiles like hailstones. She crawled toward the edge of the stage, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-streaked face. Brenda looked up at me, her eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. "Gwen, please," she sobbed, her voice echoing through the stunned silence of the ballroom. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. We were going to be family. We almost shared a last name." I looked down at the woman who had demanded my bank pin, who had called me a crazy spinster, and who had actively helped her son steal from vulnerable pensioners to feed her gambling addiction. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I did not bend down to help her up. I simply raised the crystal flute of vintage champagne I had commandeered earlier, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The cold, crisp liquid tasted like absolute victory. I lowered the glass, offered her a chilling, empty smile, and turned my back on her manufactured tears. I stepped down from the stage, walked right past the federal agents, reading Bradley his rights, and exited the ballroom without ever looking back. 6 months passed since the raid at the Harbor Hotel, and the federal justice system moved with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. Bradley did not even attempt to fight the staggering list of charges in court. Faced with the overwhelming, mathematically flawless forensic dossier I had handed directly to the authorities, his defense attorney immediately advised him to accept a comprehensive plea deal. He pleaded guilty to multiple federal counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and severe corporate embezzlement. The presiding judge showed absolutely zero leniency for a man who systematically preyed upon vulnerable elderly clients. Bradley was firmly sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his professional financial licenses, and ordered to pay a massive restitution that he could never possibly afford. His mother faced a similarly devastating, inescapable reality. Brenda was heavily indicted for international money laundering and federal conspiracy. The illegal underground gambling syndicates, immediately realizing she was under active federal investigation, completely severed all ties with her. Without the stolen retirement funds to constantly float her massive spiraling debts, her entire financial house of cards instantly imploded. She was forced to declare total humiliating bankruptcy. The federal government seized and foreclosed on her sprawling Seattle mansion, publicly auctioning off her designer gowns, expensive jewelry, and luxury vehicles to help pay back the victims she had helped defraud. She went from hosting elite society galas to living in a cramped, heavily monitored studio apartment while anxiously awaiting her own criminal trial. Meanwhile, my personal and professional life had never been more vibrant or secure. The aggressive smear campaign against me had evaporated the exact second the federal indictments were publicly unsealed. The wealthy corporate clients who had briefly doubted my sanity returned with incredibly lucrative long-term contracts, deeply impressed by my ruthless ability to dismantle a sophisticated criminal enterprise single-handedly. On a bright, sunny Sunday morning, I sat at a quiet corner table of an upscale bistro overlooking the beautiful Seattle waterfront. I was not having a tense, performative family dinner surrounded by liars. I was having a relaxed, genuinely joyful brunch with DeAndre and Madison. We drank fresh mimosas and laughed easily, enjoying the absolute peace that naturally comes from removing toxic, manipulative parasites from your daily orbit. Madison clinked her crystal glass against mine, smiling brightly as she told me about DeAndre's recent major promotion at his commercial law firm. We did not waste a single breath speaking about Bradley or Brenda. They were entirely irrelevant now, locked away in their respective miserable realities, while we focused entirely on building our own authentic, successful, and completely uncompromising futures. Looking across the table at DeAndre and Madison, I realized something profoundly important about the nature of relationships. Society constantly pushes the dangerous narrative that family is an unconditional bond dictated strictly by shared genetics or legal marriage certificates. They tell you that you must forgive toxic behavior, surrender your personal boundaries, and sacrifice your own security just to maintain the fragile illusion of peace at a Sunday dinner. But that is a complete lie, designed to keep victims compliant. True family is not defined by blood or marital expectations. Family isn't blood. It's the people who stand in front of the door so your abusers can't escape. It is the people who hand you the encrypted flash drive when you are backed into a corner. It is the people who refuse to look away when you are being manipulated and who actively help you burn down the fake empires of those who try to destroy your life. I did not just protect my bank account that day. I protected my absolute right to dictate my own worth. I walked away from a fraudulent wedding and gained an unbreakable sense of self-respect. Never allow anyone to convince you that setting a rigid financial or emotional boundary makes you selfish. Never lower your standards to fit into a family structure that requires you to shrink yourself just to make their insecurities more comfortable. Sometimes delivering a sharp, calculated kick is not merely an act of physical self-defense. It is the definitive action required to shatter the cage they built for you. Have you ever had to use the ultimate, most drastic measure to permanently cut off a highly toxic, manipulative relationship? I want to read your stories. Tell me exactly how you set your boundaries in the comments below. The harrowing story of Gwen exposes a dangerous and pervasive societal myth. The idea that familial or romantic ties demand blind loyalty and the absolute surrender of personal boundaries. Too often, we are conditioned to believe that love requires unconditional compliance, even when it actively jeopardizes our own financial and emotional security. When faced with manipulative demands disguised as family transparency, the natural instinct for many is to yield simply to keep the peace and avoid social friction. However, this narrative starkly illustrates that emotional predators thrive on this exact conditioning, using the sacred concept of family as a weapon to extract resources and exert control over their victims. The most profound lesson we can extract from this ordeal is that true self-worth is inherently tied to our ability to enforce absolute, unapologetic boundaries. Gwen's refusal to hand over her bank PIN was not merely a financial safeguard, it was a fundamental declaration of self-respect. We learn that defending ourselves against toxic individuals, even those we once trusted or loved, requires a vital shift from emotional reactivity to calculated rational defense. It teaches us to look past performative tears and societal expectations, focusing instead on cold facts and personal safety. You cannot heal, fix, or negotiate with individuals who view your existence merely as a stepping stone or a convenient financial bailout. Furthermore, the narrative powerfully redefines the very essence of what it means to be a family. Family is never guaranteed by a marriage certificate or shared DNA. It is demonstrated through consistent actions, mutual respect, and fierce protection. We must stop shrinking our lives to fit into toxic environments. Take a moment today to audit your own relationships and unapologetically cut ties with anyone who demands you sacrifice your peace for their comfort.